Okay, so let's take some of the things that we've been talking about already and kind of wrap these into key takeaways. Some of these CJ and I have mentioned already: understanding applicable regulations, understanding the data that you are protecting. I think a lot of you would agree with me that we're shifting our focus away from necessarily looking at finite systems. We've got endpoints, we've got servers, we've got clouds. Now we're starting to really look at how data moves between systems, endpoints, to our cloud service providers, back again, understanding the data that you're protecting. And perhaps that was one of the failings with the Amazon case. They didn't understand the data they had, or maybe they did. I can't speak for the intentions of those decisions that were made. But I spent a lot of time talking to companies who still don't know the data they have, where it's located, and my goodness, if there's duplicate copies of it. And you don't have to raise your hand, but there might be some of you who have duplicate Word documents or Excel spreadsheets sitting on your desktop. Well, understanding data, again, is a key point to compliance. And those of you who do a little bit more work in the privacy space, understanding how data moves from system to system, critical, especially when you're starting to talk about privacy by design and privacy engineering concepts. We've already, I think, talked about risk quite a bit. Understanding risk, the likelihood of certain events or risks, events or threats happening, conducting regular risk assessments. We talked about a control library. Here's one I like to add that kind of gets lost in the fray sometimes. When you identify your control library, make sure that the controls are actually mapped into your policy statements. It's one thing to say, I'm going to protect data. It's a different one to say that all of my endpoints are going to have whole disk encryption on them, or every mobile device I send out or every laptop is going to have BitLocker or the equivalent turned on for that device. So when you're mapping your controls to policy statements, that shows that the company is actually doing that particular control. And I believe, CJ, you like the word artifact, right?
Yeah, it comes from the auditing probably angle. It's how do you demonstrate it? And so we talked about when you use those controls or those policies, you're trying to make it easy on yourself to demonstrate when you have to. Like, we do SOC 2 audit every year, right? And we're on our second year. And so we learned a bunch from the first time around. What artifacts do we need? Because the auditor's going to go, show me. It's kind of like Ronald Reagan's statement he made: trust but verify. They want to verify. How do I show them? So to show them that we have disk encryption, they said they picked 7, 8, 9, 10 people, and they say, just give me a screenshot. So that's our artifact, a screenshot showing that disk encryption is on. Other things are trouble tickets, like when we create new users. So to me, one of the ways you make this easy is you design, when you're doing your policies, you design compliance in. Like, how am I going to show someone? What's the easy button for doing this? So when you think ahead and you kind of wrangle around it, you can really make your world a lot easier and effective again.
I completely agree. The idea in policies, some people love policies. I love policies. Other people find them to be just an annoying exercise they have to do every year. But policies serve as a document that shows management's intent to do good things. So perhaps maybe you're in the process of implementing a technology. Let's say you're implementing MFA, and you have a policy that says it's our intention to implement MFA on all administrative access devices, or whatever your policy says. But perhaps you don't have them all implemented yet. And I get this question quite a bit. Well, it can't be in the policy statement if we're not doing it 100%. It can be, because policies say this is a statement of our intent. You follow that up with a control exception policy or an exception writing, and that serves as the artifact that says, yes, it is our intention to have 100% MFA. We're not there yet because, as I'm sure some of you know, MFA implementations can be nail biting. And I think maybe that's why we have so many follically challenged people in cybersecurity, is because of MFA. projects that we've done. Yeah, no, I'm not going to tell you if this is a wig or not. Okay, so we talked a little bit about governance control libraries, policy statements. We touched on a little bit earlier in this presentation the culture, tailoring your GRC initiatives to your company culture, reviewing the program annually. And I'm going to add one other thing here. It's okay to say something didn't work. I talked to a lot of clients about data labeling and classification projects, and they start out and they've got maybe 5 different labels, and they find out through the course of the project that nobody really understands what those words mean. There's some confusion between restricted and confidential, or it's sensitive and confidential. It's okay to say we tried to do this and it failed. We're going to take a couple months, we're going to try and do a lessons learned, and we're going to reboot it. Sometimes I think when people try and do something under a GRC program, if it's classification or labeling, they want to do it perfectly. And CJ, what's that cliche about?
Perfection is the enemy of the good. And
one more time.
Perfection is the enemy of the good. And also, I think we just said this the other day, Kelli, because we're doing an assessment for a customer and helping them with this. And it's get it down, then get it right. So we have a couple of great questions. Lisa was asking, how do you get started, Kelli? What's your recommendation? Like, it's that thing, this is overwhelming. What are the resources that you recommend, and timeframes, basically, is her question.
Well, Lisa, thank you for that great question. I would start with governance. Well, that's a tough question. Sometimes I would say you have to know where your target is, or you have to know where you're headed. We actually had this conversation with a client in the last couple weeks. They said, we want to do good things. We have PCI compliance, we've got HIPAA, but we want to know the path or the road that we're traveling on. So I think the first place is to start is to understand applicable regulations. For example, HIPAA regulations may not apply to you, but maybe you're a self-insured organization, and then HIPAA does apply to you. And a lot of times, understanding where to start is understanding what you're not going to do. So I mentioned I live in Florida, and we've got weeds everywhere because things grow like crazy down here. Well, for me to go and say, I'm going to weed the entire lawn and all my flower beds on Saturday is ridiculous. I have to say, listen, I'm going to start with this small flower bed and weed this because it's going to be hot and humid and I'm going to get really crabby. So the same thing with compliance regulations. You don't have to tackle all of them at once. That's part of the working along with the risk assessment. But one of the pieces I find missing from organizations is a governance framework. And the folks at BHIS have heard this probably a million times from me, but I'm going to say it again. GRC is not cybersecurity's responsibility. Cybersecurity already has too much work on its shoulders. And we all know, and this was pointed out at some of the conferences, if you've been to them, we struggle with mental health issues in cybersecurity, not because we're weak-minded, but just because there's so many things to be anxious about. And taking a step back and saying, really, what's important to us, and understanding we can't tackle everything at once. So what are the good things we are going to do? And let's get a committee of people together, because GRC is not just cybersecurity or privacy's responsibility. It's legal, it's HR, it's senior management, it's all these organizations. So if you're in an organization where perhaps you feel like you're doing all the heavy lifting yourself, it's time to find some allies. It's time to find some friends.
So I'm still overwhelmed, Kelli. So I'll give them a use case, and I'm just going to use Black Hills Information Security.
Okay.
When I stepped in here 6 years ago, we had an acceptable use policy. We had a few other things. How do I get started? So one of the things I do is I take an agile approach. So, and then William asked us some resources for understanding the GRC. I've got some answers to that. The thing I did was I went out I recognized policies, and I sort of did that risk assessment, like what's important here, and knowing like where your key data is, those types of things. That's why I think that doing the risk assessment up front helps you prioritize. I'm going to do this flower bed, then this one, and I'm not even going to worry about GDPR until next year, because I don't think it's going to kill me because I'm not Amazon, but we'll see. Um, but but you prioritize that. I stole tons of policy from Sands. I happen to know a lady who has a really excellent policy library. I have a really excellent book about resources, this huge, like in its 27th edition of how to write policies. So I steal policies off the internet. I've got them from a bunch from Sands, Carnegie Mellon. I didn't recreate the wheel. I took some decent policy stuff and I modified it. And then I grew it. So one of the things about your policy, you got to revisit them annually. So I'll just kind of check the box in December, say, yes, I reviewed it. But usually it's like something happened. So-and-so used their phone to do this, and now it's broken. Like, oh, we need a policy for that. So I think you stay agile. So you start with some baseline policies. You try to cover the Pareto thing again. 20% of the policies are going to answer 80% of the effectiveness and security. So you get that stuff down. When you get to the governance piece, to me, again, governance is the government. It's a process. Like, what's your constitution say? Kelli has a good one. What is your charter? That the governance, the cybersecurity, those guys, they have charter. What's our bailiwick? What are our priorities? Because, like she said, you can't do everything. So you should formally and in a document prioritize what you're going to do. Like, it's essential that we do a risk assessment. Maybe it's essential that you do an annual pen test or an audit. If you're medical, you've got to have a HIPAA certification every year that you audit it. Make those things clear, because that helps you show management like, hey, we are overwhelmed. I am cybersecurity. We don't have a governance or a compliance person. We might want to think about getting it. And here's why. Here's how many hours policy writing took last year. Here's how many hours auditing took last year. I also have a good book somewhere here on governance. I took this one because CJ likes the easy button on everything. And I'll post these in. It's information security governance. And I always go simplified. I always grab the dummies books because they'll tell you the 3 most important things to do. And that gets you started. You want to get to the PhD doctoral level, grow it from there. But I'm interested, Kelli, and then frameworks. I really love the NIST CSF because to me, that's a framework. And Kelli said it has controls and things, but it sort of shows you what are the processes and things you do. And again, you take it from NIST because NIST writes the book on it. You don't have to do it the way NIST does. You right size it to a small and mid-sized business. But Kelli, what are your resources and your pointers and tips for cool stuff?
Well, I'm surprised I haven't mentioned it yet. Over at the auditscripts.com website, we have all sorts of good free resources over there. And one of the things I want to point out over at the Audit Scripts website is if you are using the critical security controls, my business partner, James, has made a mappings document that shows how all of the regulations and standards map against the CIS controls. This has been a labor of love that he's been working on for years. Also, we have a couple other interesting papers there. We have a paper about understanding risk. And what we've done in that paper is kind of taken all of the formulas and the buzzwords and said, this is really what risk means for cybersecurity. And that's called the collective risk paper. We also have a project called the Open Threat Taxonomy Project. This one is a little out of date. But for those of you who are relatively new to this, it talks about how to think about threats. A little earlier, we talked about you don't have to worry about a hurricane if you're in Wisconsin. Well, basically what we've done in that paper is said you can put threats into buckets or a taxonomy. And if you're a science geek, you know that robin that's finally showing up in the Midwest in the spring falls under a particular species and genus and all of that sort of stuff. It's a taxonomy of how animals are arranged in the animal kingdom. Well, we've done that a little bit with cybersecurity threats as well. And lastly, I will add to that, we like the easy button, as CJ has mentioned. We like to make things easier. We offer a policy subscription over at Audit Scripts where we've been taking our lessons learned over the years and we've put them together in a list of policies. And this policy subscription is under 5,000 for the year. But if you're worried about, well, am I meeting HIPAA regulations? Am I meeting the CIS controls? We've already done the heavy lifting for you, and all of those controls are in the policies already. So basically, it's a big box of policies already spelled out. There's 43 policies. I'm currently working on a bill of goods policy and an artificial intelligence policy. So if that's something that interests you, you don't have a tech writer on staff, very helpful.
And none of you do because you don't even have a security person or you're it. And I can just tell you, taking that and the audit scripts policies are the gold standard. Not only they're good looking, but they're just thought out. And so this is that whole thing. Don't recreate the wheel, leverage it, spend the dollars on things like even this book. So this book which comes with a CD so that you can take the language in Word doc format and alter it. It's like somebody's thought of all this stuff in the policy realm. I stole stuff from Carnegie Mellon. I think they're business continuity and disaster recovery type stuff. It will save you so many hours. And audit scripts is anything that, like, that book costs $700. So calculate out the number of hours it's going to take you and the jump start it gives you, and tell your boss you need to spend a little money.
I have another suggestion to add to that, CJ. Universities put a lot of their security policies online. And one university whose policies I go and look at, and I learn tips and tricks all the time, is the University of Wisconsin. Their policy library is amazing. And I'm not saying go and plagiarize, but I'm saying look at how they're structured. Look at maybe a topic that they've introduced in there, and it'll give you some ideas, or at least make you feel like it's not such a big job or such heavy lifting.
It's not really plagiarism when someone posts a policy, is it? I mean,
I wouldn't want you to copy and paste
verbatim. But you can't take anyone else's policies. They have some. Your workstation shall have antivirus. Don't disable your antivirus. I mean, that type of language it's not exactly prose, unless they wrote it in iambic pentameter. I know you're all going, what the hell is iambic pentameter? If you ever watched Moonlighting, you get it, or seen Shakespeare. So,
are there any other questions? Because honestly, folks, I don't have the Discord channel on my active screen. I get easily distracted, and I'm over 50, and I can only concentrate on one thing at a time.
Oh,
I'm 60, and I was tracking it for you.
I've got a whole list of questions that we've been
to the rescue
for
the win.
In the background, I do stuff. All right. So from North earlier today, how do you choose the right control library?
There isn't one.
Okay.
There isn't one, because that means well, NIST is good, but CIS is crap. The right controls are the one that answer your risks, and they do it in a cost and a time capable. You've got to pick them. And again, roll this thing up. Take the biggies. We want 2FA. Like, please grab on to 2FA. Make that a policy, and you'll have exceptions. But do a risk assessment. That's going to tell you what's important.
Okay. No, that's good. I think you really did answer the question. How do you choose the right library? Analyze your risks and figure out which one addresses your risks best. So, no, good. So what we got here? Cyber Saber. Where is a good place to get free or low cost policies for nonprofits or higher education? So Kelly, you did kind of just go into where you've got the policies there, but are there any specifics around higher education and nonprofits that people should pay particular attention to?
Well, I did mention universities, University of Wisconsin. CJ mentioned the SANS Policy Library. Honestly, if you search online, you will see all sorts of examples.
Okay.
I had to jump on the diversity, equity, and inclusion bandwagon. I found one in an art museum that I could modify. So you just search DEI policy or GDPR policy, and you can't miss it. You get too much to look at. but you only need to look at a few and go, oh, these all seem similar. I'll just take this language.
Gotcha. Okay. Let's see. Other questions we've got here. At one point, an anonymous attendee put in here, which ready-made control library can we use? What are you referencing? So this was in specific to kind of a moment in time when you were saying things, but I think what they're really asking is which of the control libraries maybe is, the most complete?
NIST.
NIST.
Let's see what
Okay.
Kelli says. I'm kind of...
On the Audit Scripts website, there is a project called the Collective Controls. And what this project is, this actually was James's COVID project, because he spent so much time mapping the frameworks and the standards to the CIS controls. He basically said, well, okay, for those of you who are not familiar with the CIS controls, they are 18, they used to be 20, very technical controls on how to stop attacks. But they don't deal with governance and they don't deal with privacy. So basically what the Collective Controls Project is a list of all of the controls that you would possibly want to implement instead of chasing framework after framework after framework. And CJ, I'm not disagreeing with you about NIST 853. There are some controls in there that just don't apply to private citizens or private organizations. So those have been sort of sifted out of the collective controls, but that may be something you're interested in looking at.
So my favorite was the CIS, because I think there are. But as far as completeness, and I love it because we did the same thing you guys did, Kelli. I developed what I called the Rosetta Stone spreadsheet back in the day to map like all these different things out there, because there's a lot of COBIT. I mean, ISO sort of has them. High Trust, which we're not allowed to look at. But I've really rarely found a control that isn't in the NIST. Is ISO. NIST is prevalent in the US. ISO is, again, a pay to play. Like, I bought ISO and then they came out with a new version. I had to spend another $200 to upgrade. I hate them.
And to add to that, not about ISO, but going back to NIST, we've done some work in the Middle East, and a lot of Middle Eastern countries are adopting the NIST standards as well.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I do want to jump in on that because I was talking to the ISACA Belfast, ISACA group in Ireland, and I mentioned with some of our backdoors and breaches stuff that we're very NIST focused, but they're in a part of the world that might not use it. And he goes, no, that's the standard we use. And NIST, for those who may be hearing this for the first time, is the National Institute of Standards and Technology run by the United States Chamber of Commerce. So not only is it the gold standard, but other folks in other countries say, well, we'll just use what they're using. So yeah, absolutely. And then the last questions that I was able to capture here is around NIST. So is NIST 830 still currently used, or is there something more current? And then it's literally the same question, but what about ISO 27005? Is this widely used, or is there something else that should be adopted?
ISO is used a lot. I know that in international business and large businesses. Large businesses will pay for that library. NIST 800-30 is up to date. They revise it. If it's not, then that's what's being used. So the 800-30, again, even if it's just a model, it shows you sort of a spreadsheet approach. And I don't use it verbatim. I've totally tweaked it to my thing. But the idea is that what are your risks? What are your controls? What's the risk in the wild? What's the mitigated risk? What if we did these 3 projects? What would the mitigated risk? And then what's the risk my executives are signing off saying, we accept this risk level? And making them accept it, because this is another thing. When you talked about mental health, Kelli, security people don't own the risk, folks. You make, hey, we should upgrade our firewalls. Boss won't let me, too expensive. That's not on you, security people. That's on management. They own the company. They own the dollars, the resources, the risks. All you can do is be a good steward and advise people. And when people want to accept a stupid risk like ransomware, we're not going to do MFA. Well, I told you to, but whatever.
Right.
Don't yell at me when our hospital is locked out, and you can see it in the newspaper every day.
So let's go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you for joining. Thank you for coming to another BHIS webcast. And Kelli and CJ are going to stick around in the Discord channel if you have other questions that maybe didn't get answered live on the webcast. But Kelli, CJ, again, thank you for joining and going through this. Is there any final thought you want to leave folks with?
Kelli, ladies first.
Keep doing the good things you're doing. And I applaud you for coming to this webinar and learning about what may have been a very dry topic, but is really important. And thank you for taking the time out of your day. Appreciate it.
And if you hate it that much, get help. There are lots of people that will help you. We'll talk about that in a minute. We'll help you. We're happy. We have some things we'll do for free. We have some things we'll do for money. We'll always help you. Reach out to your community. Ask your peers. How do you guys handle this? How are you handling GDPR over at the Art Museum?
So, CJ, I am going to drop off, but Ryan will be here for a second. So if you want to talk a little bit about some of the things that we do and that you and Kelli are working on at Black Hills, if you need help with going through your compliance standards and building out those frameworks and understanding the challenges and risks you have, these two people can help you. I have to go run a tabletop exercise for one of our clients. So if you two want to go through and ask questions or get into Discord, that's great. Thank you all for coming, and hopefully you'll be able to tune into another wonderful webcast. So thank you all. I'll hand it over to you.
Crush it, Ian. Yeah, so Kelli, go ahead.
So CJ, I want to add one other thing you mentioned, but to follow up on ISO. I know we get a little crabby with ISO, but they actually did something really cool when it comes to privacy. If you have ISO certification for cybersecurity and you're interested in getting your privacy program up to speed, especially if you're in one of those states you mentioned where there's a new privacy law, if you are ISO cybersecurity certified, my words, not theirs, you can also get the ISO privacy certification as well. You cannot get the privacy certification as a standalone certification, but you can get it as an add-on or a tag-on to your existing ISO certification.
That's nice.
I think it's pretty cool.
Kelli, any comments on jobs in GRCC?
The jobs in GRC, I think they're going to look a little bit different. They're going to be data governance jobs. It may be a risk analyst. It also may be not within the cybersecurity group. It may be in the audit group. It may be in the compliance group. And I'm sure you're all familiar with the BISO idea, the person who's in charge of security within the business unit. We're also seeing people within the business unit taking on the GRC functionalities, even though they may not have the title. Have you seen this, CJ, as well?
Yes. So this is so broad on this, and this is a place where English majors can come in and do the job. No, really, if you're open to learning and education, to me, a broader background is better. So that's like when I want a pen tester, I want someone who's done workstation. I want someone who's done network, multiple operating systems, VMware, developer. That's the ideal. You can't usually get all those, and people can't get the ideal candidate for anything. So a good broad background and a basic interest in security, and you've got to grow it. I think it's sort of a seniorish job. Usually in a smaller company. If there's a big company that's got a big GRCC, they'll take entry-level people to just come in and help handle the overflow.
And there was a question sorry, CJ, I didn't mean to interrupt there.
No, that's good.
There was a comment in the Discord about how technical you have to be. That's a very good question. I think if you understand general systems, if I say privilege management or identity management, you understand conceptually what it is. You don't have to be the one in front of the keyboard actually configuring the system. But how systems interact with each other, I do think you have to have a basic knowledge of. CJ, what are your thoughts on that?
You're never going to know. No one ever knows everything. I mean, John Strand himself will say, like, one of his testers does something, he's like, I've never even heard of that. Like, there's an alarming amount of information you know nothing about. It's always self-education. That's this whole field, everything in technology. You don't know it. You're going to have to learn it. A fundamental understanding of risk, go get some of the certs. One of the things is in building a career, take jobs that give you the experience you want to do what you do in the long run. So sometimes you just go out there and add it on or learn it on the job.
So I have a story to add here. I was at Hack SpaceCon over, we had talked about a little earlier in the Discord, and I met a really interesting guy by the name of David. And David was an expert plumber, and he said, I want to get into cybersecurity. What do you think about this? And I said, oh my goodness, you would be so good as a risk expert. And he looked at me kind of funny. And I said, you, David, have all of this experience as a plumber. You understand what happens if the main to the house is cut, or if something is backing up. You understand how backflows work. You understand size of piping. You understand threading. You understand the importance of putting all these pieces together. And so what I wanted to emphasize with him was, just because you may not understand how MFA works today doesn't mean you don't understand risk already. So some of these life lessons you've learned in other jobs that may not have a cybersecurity title are beneficial and crucial and we need that expertise in cybersecurity.
Yeah, and Gray Omega, I think, said someone was just saying that like GRC is the place for the non-technical people. I tell you, that's true of me. I am the dumb guy at BHIS technically. When John hired me, I'm like, why in the John disappeared on me when he left the government stuff, right? And started doing SANS teaching and stuff. And he hired me. I'm like, why the hell are you hiring me? He said, I need someone to help me keep the plates spinning. There's a lot of moving parts. And GRC is definitely one of the, like I said, for English majors, history majors, people with just life experience, you've got to assimilate the technical line, but really everyone understands risk. Now, you'll learn a lot about it as you go, but in the tech, someone who's really great database administrator is never going to take the GRC role. I got to what was it? Used to be a categorization. I was a low-level system administrator, Unix. I started off on Mac OS on a help desk. I have enough. I was actually a test engineer because I knew the Unix command line enough to do a man. So I actually tested government systems. I couldn't always write the scripts, but I could do them. So I filled my niche, and I fill this role of the go-between between I take the information from the engineers and I give it to the customer. I'm a people person. Sorry, that has to be done in cyber. So there is a realm for that. So if you're not the twidget that can program in Java, 6 languages, and you know the Unix kernel, you can take a low level, and it's great to have a little bit of technical background and go into GRC and specialize. It's needed. They need smart people that will do this hard work, the more kind of lawyerly kind of work, because lawyers won't do this either. Big hint. Lawyers suck at this because they are the worst technical. There are very few lawyers with a good technical background. So you can bridge that middle ground, believe it or not, and be quite successful. And the demand is only growing. It's just growing.
Well, I see a lot of comments about English majors. The reason why English majors are so good as GRC people is because they can analyze what they've read. And a big part of your job, CJ, and my job is to read through the regulations and standards and say, okay, now obviously a lawyer wrote this. Now, what is this really saying? Oh, I have to turn on encryption on my devices. Okay. Gotcha there. So if you are good at translating, if you had to read Canterbury Tales or Shakespeare or what is that, Beowulf, and you are able to understand that, man, you have got a superpower when it comes to regulations and standards.
Not only that, tech editing, like, again, you've got to bridge the two worlds, but why do you think lawyers are English majors? Because the language is critically important in communicating, and communication is part of this. You got to get the tech control side right. You don't get that right, I don't care what you've written. That's why compliance can be a joke. We met the letter of the law, big deal. We got hacked. There are so many skills that become important. how to present, how to think strategically, how to risk, just get the process down and take ownership of it and grow it, like step by step, eat the elephant bite at a time.
So I see a comment in the Discord channel about policies written at an 8th grade reading level. Let's talk about that a little bit. Policies, who reads policies? I would like to start there. Of course, the answer is, well, everybody's supposed to read them because our security awareness program says that they read it. But I would argue that not everybody reads the policies. Who is the audience on the policy? Some, like an acceptable use policy, yeah, probably needs to be written at an easily accessible level, 8th grade, 7th grade, whatever that level is. But if you have an encryption and cryptography policy, really, who's going to read that? So, CJ, what are your thoughts on scope and audience for policies?
Target it, because it is. The acceptable use policy is for everyone. The the trusted user. So what are your admin guidelines? Those are written for the techies. You got to have the tech language in there. You've got to talk encryption algorithms and key lengths, and you got to answer all the right things. So I consult those people as the stakeholder. They tell me what to do. I figure out how to phrase it because I'm writing it for management and the auditors as well. Like, you have a lot of stakeholders. Know who your audience is and write to them.
And some people hold different beliefs that everybody needs to read the policy or not. I don't believe everybody needs to read them. I mean, it's saying even the janitor needs to need or has to read all 54 policies or whatever, but the janitor needs to be aware of what applies to him. If he doesn't ever use encryption, then why read the encryption policy? But physical access to the building and MFA to log in to read email, absolutely, the janitor needs to know those things. So who reads the policy is really who's impacted by it or who it applies to.
So the government, go back to my NIST days in the U.S. government, they said that when they signed the acceptable use, one of the things they said that they've read and understand the system security plan, which is usually like a 300-page document with references under it. And I know nobody read it. And so the security brief was to tell them those key things. Don't use your password here. Don't make a password here that's been used anywhere. Don't disable antivirus. Change it. Don't use the same. Just all these things. Like, what are the essentials? And I had a bullet list. It was about a page long. Maybe it's 2 pages. These are the real shall nots, and that's what you brief people. And that's I briefed them and then said, hey, if you want to see where this comes from, that comes from the acceptable use policy. And I tell people when they come into Black Hills, here's the 4 policies you need to read. And by read them, I mean go look through them for about 10 minutes a policy. That's what I mean by read.
So, CJ, do you want to take the question, how will users know what policy to read? Do we curate the policy specifically for each role in the org?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. There will probably be policies or standards or guidelines or procedures that only apply to the database admins. So you absolutely, general users, boom. There's stuff for the managers. Managers need to understand the risk assessment policy. If they have input in the change management, only privileged users need to understand change management or anyone who's going to submit a change. You absolutely hone this down because I've got, in my stupid little organization, I have over 50 policies. Over.
Dang. So I love that word, curate the policies.
That's a nice word. That's an English major right there.
Oh, yeah, or a poli-sci major, because we got a lot of those still on
or history.
In history. But so curate basically means we're gonna pick the choice ones that apply to you. I love that. Curate. We're gonna have to keep that one, CJ.
Serum mutable. So what are you, serum mutable? Tell us. We guessed 3 different areas. He's probably comp sci.
MBA.
MBA. That's the same thing. It's like lawyer.
Okay, so I know we have not been as loving to lawyers on this, but I do want to add that lawyers are an essential part of the team because they too are trained to defend the organization in court, in documents, in contracting agreements. So if we do have any lawyers on here, we're not dissing lawyers. We understand how important they are and the role they play, but their voice is one of many in a team of stakeholders. There are some organizations that rely too much on the legal's point of view, and I think we're suggesting on this is the stakeholders, the governance team is cybersecurity, it's legal, it's HR, it's senior leadership, it's a number of different stakeholders.
Yep. I have a legal review in 10, 11 minutes. Should we wrap this up?
Absolutely. Well, I'm really glad everybody was able to join us. Is Ryan our technical expert on this?
He's still here. I see him.
I am here. Yes. I can hit the big button and end it all.
Well, I just want to thank, and I know we didn't probably had the normal thousands, but we had some people that were very engaged. And I saw the feedback. I love the little hand clapping and thumbs up and hearts. That lets me know that we're hitting a topic. That's pretty cool. So again, I have a love-hate relationship with this stuff. Unfortunately, it's essential. And fortunately, it actually will help you be a better company if you tackle this. But don't let the tail wag the dog. Kelli and I are doing this. We're growing the practice. Kelli and I both have dozens of years of experience in this stuff. We like to take what we've done and right-size it and help customers. There's no single we have a few services that are sort of defined, but really we can do anything. You can just be like, hey, can I jump on a call for a half hour and talk to you guys about how to start eating this? And that's a freebie, kids. So we're just happy. Our love here is we get enough work. We seem to keep food on our plates. We do want to help you and make your life better and easier in the easiest way possible.
CJ's easy button. I love it.
That was easy.
Well, thanks, everyone. I think it's time for us to sign off.
Ciao, babies.
Ciao.
All right. We'll see you all next time at the next webcast. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Ryan. Bye-bye.
Bye.